Welcome to another episode of our video series of The Mechanics of Human Cognition. It's great to be back. We're talking about a concept today that I think everyone thinks they understand. Freedom, right? It sounds so straightforward, but when you really start to pick it apart, it's anything but. Exactly. It's this huge paradox, and that's what we're going to get into today. What does it really mean from a cognitive standpoint to be free? So let's kick things off with a pretty classic image. Think about an animal out in the wild. Yeah, the eagle soaring, the wolf running. We hold that up as this ultimate symbol of being totally free, don't we? But is it, really? I mean, think about it. Is a creature that is completely, 100% bound by its biological programming, hunger, fear, the instinct to reproduce, is that creature actually free? Or, in a very real sense, is it just a slave to its own nature, following a script it can't possibly rewrite? And that really gets to the core of a huge misunderstanding. This popular idea of freedom, just doing whatever you feel like whenever you feel like it, it's not just flawed, it's actually a recipe for disaster. If you're basically a prisoner to every single whim and impulse that pops into your head, are you in charge? Or are you just uncontrolled? That's it, exactly. The kind of freedom that truly defines us as human is something else entirely. It's found in the exact opposite place, not in indulgence, but in restraint. And that's the central paradox we're exploring today. The idea that genuine freedom isn't about having endless options, but about having the conscious, deliberate power to just say no. It's about mastering yourself. And to see how that works, we need to look under the hood at what our brains are doing. To really get a handle on this power of restraint, we've got to look at the actual mechanics of how we make choices. And there's this famous and honestly kind of unsettling experiment in neuroscience from Benjamin Libet that just turned the whole conversation about free will on its head. What he found was that the brain activity that signals a decision, like, say, to move your finger, it actually shows up seconds before the person is even consciously aware that they've decided to do it. For a lot of people, that was a bombshell. It sounded like our conscious choice is just a story we tell ourselves after the fact, that maybe free will is just an illusion our brain creates. But that is not the whole story, not even close. Because while that initial impulse can be predicted by looking at brain signals, Libet's later work found something else, something that's often overlooked but is absolutely crucial. And here is the twist. The researchers could see the impulse to act forming in the brain. They could predict it was about to happen. But what they could not predict at all was when a person, after having that impulse, would then consciously decide to stop themselves, to veto the action. That power to cancel the command showed no predictive brain signal. It appears to be a purely conscious executive function, that unpredictable ability to stop an action. That's where our real agency is. It's not about the initial urge, it's about what we choose to do with it. Some people have called this free won't, and honestly, it might be a way more accurate concept than free will. This idea isn't even new. Some philosophical traditions have had this figured out for centuries. In Turkish thought, for instance, they make a key distinction. There's ihtiyar, which is your ability to choose to do one thing from a list of options. But then there's irade, which is something much closer to what we'd call willpower. It's the strength to refrain from doing something. The whole concept suggests our greatest power isn't in what we do, but in what we consciously choose not to do. So now, let's see how this idea of an internal brake applies to the external world. So, if our internal freedom is all about self-imposed limits, well, guess what? The exact same principle applies to the outside world. Freedom can't and doesn't exist in some kind of vacuum. It only works when it operates within a framework of rules and boundaries that you just can't negotiate with. I mean, we are all bound by the laws of biology. We need to breathe air, we can't fly by flapping our arms. We're bound by physics, like gravity. And we are absolutely bound by social realities. A human being simply cannot survive, let alone thrive, in total isolation. But these aren't prisons. They're just the fundamental parameters of reality. And recognizing them is the first step to doing anything meaningful. A bird doesn't defy gravity. It masters the principles of aerodynamics to achieve flight. That's its freedom, working brilliantly within the rules, not pretending they don't exist. Think about any game you've ever played. Chess, basketball, poker, you name it. You are only free to actually play the game once you understand and agree to the rules. The lines on the court, the rules of how the pieces move, they don't limit the game, they literally create the game. Without them, there's no game at all, just a bunch of chaos. Well, life's limits are the rules of the board that allow us to play strategically and with purpose. And what's really cool is that this principle scales up perfectly from one person to a whole society. a nation operates on the exact same logic. True collective freedom isn't just about not having an external ruler. It's a very structured, disciplined system that's built from the ground up, starting with the individual. It all starts with individuals who can govern themselves. From there, a group of people can achieve independence, that is, freedom from being controlled by somebody else. But the final, and by far the hardest step, is achieving true sovereignty. And that's a really important distinction. See, independence is a passive state. It just means no one is telling you what to do. Sovereignty, on the other hand, is an active state. It's the ability of a people to unify, to channel their collective will, and to actively go after a shared vision for their future. And to do that, you need a common purpose. The Turkish term mefkure just captures this idea perfectly. You can think of it as a society's shared North Star. It's more than just a plan. It's a grand, unifying ideal that aligns the actions of millions of free individuals, so they're all pulling toward the same goal. Without a mefkere, a nation of free individuals is just a crowd, with everyone running off in their own direction. That's anarchy, not freedom. It's the shared purpose that transforms a population into a sovereign people. So let's bring all these ideas back together. We've got internal self-control, we've got accepting external boundaries, and we've got the need for a collective purpose. So what does all this disciplined freedom have to do with happiness? Well, pretty much everything. We tend to chase happiness by just trying to get what we want in the moment, but that kind of pleasure never lasts. A deeper, more durable kind of contentment comes from a totally different place. Real psychological well-being is tied directly to this feeling of agency. It's the sense that you are the author of your own life story. And that means taking responsibility for your choices, the good ones and the bad ones. When you feel that your place in life, whatever it is the result of your own decisions, even your mistakes, you can be at peace with it. But if you feel like you're just a passive victim of your circumstances, it's almost impossible to be content. So the crucial point is this: every single time you exercise your willpower, your free won't, to make a conscious and deliberate choice, especially when it's hard, especially when it means resisting an easy impulse, you are building that sense of agency. The person who feels like they are at the steering wheel of their own life is time and again shown to have higher levels of happiness and fulfillment than the person who feels like they're just along for the ride. That's the ultimate payoff of this disciplined freedom. Which leaves us with a final question for you to think about. We usually talk about freedom like it's a right that you're given, or a state that you claim. But what if that whole way of looking at it is wrong? What if freedom isn't a possession, but a practice? What if it's a cognitive muscle that, just like any other, needs constant, deliberate training to get stronger? Maybe freedom isn't something you have, but something you build, one conscious choice at a time.